So we're skipping Lady of the Month for November. 1, because it's election season and I don't want to get too deep into that, other than telling you to vote if you're American and you haven't already. 2, November is also known as National Novel Writing Month, and in that spirit we're doing another episode of La Femme Lit. As you might remember, this is the series that spotlights literature and books that are by and about women. I put it to a vote among my patrons, and they chose Vox by Christina Dalcher, which came out earlier this year. The basic premise is that of a dystopian United States, where women are limited to communicating in 100 words a day and confined to housework. Upon its release, many critics were calling it the spiritual successor to Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. And misogynistic dystopias are rather de rigueur at the moment, which one could say is the result of the political climate meeting up with the trends started by books like The Hunger Games, Divergent, and The Maze Runner. So, does Vox squander the goodwill of the zeitgeist or make the most of it, imparting a powerful message? I'll go into non-spoilers first. The book is written in the first person and starts in media res. In general, I don't care for that. It makes exposition feel a little clunky, but here it makes sense. This is a very new dystopia, and our main character, Jean, was a cognitive linguist. Words were her trade, and now she has neither words nor trade. It makes sense that this would dominate her every waking moment. The entire book is a stream of consciousness process more than anything else. Because Jean cannot vocalize, we follow her thoughts everywhere they might go. And her thoughts? Well, Dalcher was definitely trying to be #relevant. There's passport restrictions, mandated classes on religion, a wall, marches, a president whose inauguration guarantees the end times for all women. I'm regretting this more and more with every chapter. And I get it, some things need to be said, some anvils need to be dropped. But in a medium as nuanced as the novel, this feels like virtue signaling. The text feels more effective when it's showing the world Jean inhabits, rather than dumping exposition that displays Dalcher's credibility as a woke feminist who's totally with the times. Jean even has Latina lesbian friend Jackie Juarez to be the one woman who saw this whole dystopia coming. In flashbacks, Jackie rattles off statistics explaining everything happening and predicts the return to suburbia and all it represents, while Jean denies its possibility. This is not a book. This is a movie waiting to happen. In a movie, this kind of backstory could have been super effective, but the novel is at its strongest when it is in the present. When Jean is feeling the ache that comes from not being able to tell her daughter she's gonna be okay. I kept having to stop reading. Not because I had other obligations or needed to sleep, but because I wasn't enjoying myself. This is not a fun book to read, but that's the point. It's designed to get under the skin, to make the reader feel uncomfortable. The word hysterical keeps showing up a lot, and it can't be anything but deliberate. Not when it means of the womb. Not when the author has a doctorate in linguistics. I hate thinking about this world, about how real it feels. I don't want it to be real, but it could be. I would pause, watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, or The Good Place, just something to restore my faith in humanity. Then, back into the nightmare. And it's getting harder and harder for me to keep spoilers out of the equation, so what else? Couples that aren't cis-hetero are gone, obviously. School for Girls is now just home economics with basic math. Everything they need to be good, pure women. Reminders that the worst of us are not the willfully evil, but the ones who are good, yet stand by. Who do nothing. Who accept and normalize evil. I don't know if I can recommend this book. For all its resonance, I found it deeply unpleasant, and I definitely don't recommend it for people with anxiety. But it feels like it's still worth reading in its own way. It's a complicated, vicious cycle, and it does work largely on confirmation bias. If your views skew liberal, this book will resonate with you. If you skew conservative, it's going to seem like pandering to the left. You really have to read it and judge it for yourself. And from here on out, there are going to be spoilers. The main plot of the book involves Jean getting called upon by the executive branch to work on curing the president's brother of his accident-induced aphasia. She uses this as leverage to get a reprieve for herself and her daughter Sonia, but it comes with consequences. Namely, forced beta testing new versions of the counters. She is also dealing with the stress of an unplanned pregnancy and the return of her ex, Lorenzo, because Christina Dalcher never lets her protagonist catch a break. Or minds crossing the line from being inspired by The Handmaid's Tale to straight-up plagiarism. I realize that Atwood and Dalcher are basically using the same inspiration of fundamentalist right-wing Abrahamic faiths. But by the time mentions of secret brothels and work camps for adulteresses pop up, you're like, really? Thankfully, as the plot gets going, it gets less uncomfortable because there's a sense of forward momentum rather than just wallowing in the awful. Then you get another dose of cold water with the introduction of Sharon, a black woman in an interracial marriage, who's concerned that soon enough, she and her daughters will be targeted for their race, which of course leads into mentions of a resistance. Because, as Sharon points out, there is always a resistance. But that also highlights a problem in that the plot feels cluttered. There would be enough at stake even if Jean weren't pregnant, or rekindling her affair with Lorenzo, who is the baby's father. I don't want to keep comparing it to The Handmaid's Tale, but given that the book was basically marketed on comparisons to The Handmaid's Tale, I keep comparing it to The Handmaid's Tale, which did a much better job at keeping the story concentrated on one thing. To be clear, I mean The Handmaid's Tale, the book, not the series. That's its own episode waiting to happen. Patreon it for expedited results. Maybe even a crossover with a certain British intellectual type?
No.
Man! It's Jenga. Christina Dalcher is playing literary Jenga. Planning stuff at the start, bringing it back, but at some point the tower's gotta topple. Jenga! Jean's oldest son, who had willingly converted, gets a wake-up call after he and his girlfriend have sex, and she gets shipped off to a work camp. Jean starts uncovering a larger conspiracy meant to corrupt her research. A conspiracy to induce aphasia, to make it possible to permanently silence anyone. The term mad with power has never seemed so apropos. Stories like this work better on a smaller scale. Trying too hard to make it seem big and important can backfire. The book really is at its best when it's about Jean and Sonia. That bond is enough. And it's too easy, you know? To have it all come down to one person. It's narratively convenient, sure, but it's also kind of lazy, simplistic. And then the genre decides to swerve into being a heist novel. Or just an action novel. Either way, it's a slow burn that suddenly becomes an atomic bomb. When you have 80 chapters that are all relatively short, and your climax in earnest starts in the mid-70s, your pace is kinda screwed. It's all resolved far too quickly, without Jean being present for that resolution, and then it just skips to an epilogue that's way too happy. The dystopia only lasted a year, Jean, Lorenzo, and her children escaped and are living happily in Italy, and American women have all their rights back and are running for office. Why didn't we get to see that part of it unfold? For that matter, why did Christina Dalcher feel the need to give us that epilogue period? Is it because we need that bit of hope to reassure us that terrible things are only temporary and that it will never go that far? The ending does kind of cop to the fact that we should not depend on a single hero saving the day. It has to be everyone. But it also undercuts that message because Jean has no part in that. She's safely in Italy with Lorenzo and her children. I think Dalcher was going for a bittersweet Hunger Games type ending, but it ended up being more Harry Potter saccharine. Also, it sort of undoes the character development Jean went through to become more proactive. Look, I wanted to be good and keep politics out of this because I get that we need a mental break from all of that. But that's also irresponsible because art doesn't exist in a bubble. Politique exists in everything, and we shouldn't ignore that. We can't ignore that. We can't take anything that we have now for granted. That's why this book matters. Have you read Vox? What were your thoughts? Let me know in the comments along with more book suggestions. I promise future episodes will not be as pretentious as this one. I was just trying something new. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch again. And count. Thank you, Dom Smith of Lost in Adaptation, for agreeing to a one-word cameo. If you're not watching him already, you really should be. He's great. Please leave likes and comments, share and subscribe, follow on Facebook and Twitter, and if you have the money, join my Patreon. Merci! A bientôt!